Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with Leilani Ledingham, who is the product marketing manager at Covalent, a local Vancouver legendary Web3 company. Thanks for being with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Okay, so let's first figure out, let's just hear a little bit about Covalent and what you do there as a
Mhm.
bit of an intro. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Covalent basically indexes blockchain data. So it's like a traditional SaaS company, sort of,
Hmm.
except it's based around blockchains and the Web3 space. So the third web, the ownership economy, which I guess we'll touch on a little bit
Yeah,
more in this podcast.
yeah.
So we index all of the smart contracts, all of the data on a blockchain end to end across multiple chains. And then we provide it to developers, so people that are building applications, through the use of an API, which is a tool that a lot of people are familiar with in other industries too.
Great. You're really good at that. I feel like you've explained that a few times.
I should be good at
Like
it
every
because
time
it's
you
kind
go
of
to
my
your
job.
every time you go to your parents, they're like, "So what do you do again exactly?"
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what do they do with that data once they
hmm
receive this file of all this information? How is that helpful to them, to these developers?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to get data or extract data from blockchains. So we focus on just the read element. You can read and write to blockchains, meaning you can like write a smart contract and actually produce something, and then you can extract data and you can display it. So we help with the front end applications because if people want to read large amounts of data and show, they want to create a wallet, for instance, for people to use and see all
Hmm.
of their balances and all of their assets on chain. We can provide all that information and then they can feed it into their applications. But really, because it's just all the data on a blockchain, there's a lot of different use cases.
Hmm.
So there's like wallets, NFT galleries, the NFT metadata, so things like the actual image and
Hmm.
the properties or the attributes of the NFT. You can use it for taxation to check like all of your on-chain records of what you've done if you're
Yeah.
needing to pay taxes. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of possibilities. It's really just like a data lake.
Yeah, a data lake. That's great. Okay, so and now maybe if you can quickly tell us, how did you get into Web3? What's your background to put you in a position to work for a brand like Covalent?
Yeah, I got into it in a bit of a weird way, actually. But I'm seeing now that it's a little bit more reflective of Web3. So people like to use me as an example, which is kind of fun. But I actually went to UBC and I studied economics there. And then a lot of my peers and just kind of the traditional career paths are to go into banking from economics,
Yeah.
which I just didn't really like. I just didn't feel like I belonged in that area.
What a surprise.
Yeah, so I was experimenting and I'd heard about blockchain, but it still is. And at the time, this was 2 years ago, it's just really hard to find information or resources
Right.
or connections or anything legitimate because it's super noisy.
Yeah.
So I was on Crunchbase actually, which is like how you find companies that have recently raised or growing companies. And I was just searching blockchain companies in
Hmm.
Vancouver,
Yeah.
which I got so lucky because it was before this was really a hub,
Yeah.
and most of the companies are in San Francisco or
Hmm.
something. But I found Covalent. I followed them on LinkedIn, and then I saw they published an ambassador program.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies in Web3 will have ambassador programs to kind of recruit a community. I didn't know any of that, but I thought it'd be a good way to meet people.
Mm.
And it was. I made a lot of connections. I got accepted into that. And I sort of, I guess, kind of rose through the ranks
Yeah.
and then ended up coming on full time and working at Covalent.
Yeah. That's great.
Mhm.
Okay, that's super interesting. Okay, so let's talk about DApps. So for my first question really is, what is a DApp? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so DApps it's a fancy word for decentralized applications.
Hmm.
So it's just like any other app, can be on your phone or on your device, but it's built on a decentralized network. So basically it's built over top of a blockchain.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So when we hear the words layer one and layer two, are all DApps layer two, and are all layer twos DApps?
Um,
Or what's the deal with those two terms that we hear?
that's a good question. I mean, it's not really my specialization. I know that there's people working on different kind of like DApp is a bit of a loose term.
Right.
So I think it can apply to both.
Lots of different things.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some kind of application here. When we look at DApps, can you give some examples of DApps, maybe the most popular DApps that people might have heard about, maybe even on the news? What are some DApps that people use that we might have heard of before?
Yeah, I would say the most kind of popular ones are decentralized finance related.
Yeah.
So places where people are actually buying and selling and swapping cryptocurrency or
Okay.
tokens.
Yeah.
So things like Uniswap or
Hmm.
SushiSwap or 1inch. Those are kind of like the big names in decentralized exchanges, which are also abbreviated to DEXs.
Okay. Okay. Well, that makes. Yeah, we love these weird terms, dexes and
There's
dapps, and
so many terms in crypto.
it's like I was actually thinking of making just a dictionary of
Yeah.
crypto terms.
Yeah, there is actually, I think it's Gemini that has a glossary.
Oh, really?
So I do recommend that for
Okay,
people.
that's a good
Yeah.
resource. Okay, so how are DApps related to Web3? Or maybe you can
Mhm.
explain what Web3 is, because you kind of referenced it earlier
Yeah,
when you're
sure.
explaining Covalent.
Yeah, Web3 is just another jargony term. So, but basically, people break down the internet into different phases. So there was Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Over time frames, Web 1 is kind of like the first internet people know of.
Right.
It's like 90s to early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it was just the read component. So
Right.
basically, you're talking about like static websites and email and stuff like that. Web 2 is, I think it's referred to more as like the social media
Hmm.
economy or the platform
Yeah.
economy. So it's where you start to be able to read and write. So
Yeah.
you can actually program and interact with things on the web.
Yeah.
And you have logins. So you have social media like Facebook and Instagram, and you have companies where you have a profile. It's just the more of the modern internet, I guess, that we're still kind of in, and
Sure.
people know that.
Yeah.
But basically, in that setting, your data and all of your activity on the internet is owned by other people. So
Hmm.
it's like all of these companies that have access to your behavior and they can buy and sell that data, and you don't really get a piece of um, your participation on there.
Hmm.
So Web3 is this third version of the internet, which people are kind of evolving right now.
Hmm.
And it's referred to as the ownership economy.
Mm.
So it's read, write, and own. And the premise is that you, instead of interacting with a login or going to these companies and relying on them to store your data, you actually carry that all around with you in a wallet.
Right.
So you create a wallet on chain, and then you can connect it and you can transfer your own data and you bring it with you place to place. So it's kind of like in a briefcase digitally. And yeah, it enables you to do a lot of interesting things. And basically, the premise is to cut out middlemen.
Mhm.
So in traditional banking, you have like a stockbroker or you have somebody that gets a percentage. And I don't know, if you go to the bank, you know that you always pay like rates and you
Yeah.
always have all of these other ways for the bank to make money,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. So many fees.
Yeah. So you don't really have that in Web3. You
Yeah.
just, you do things yourself and
Yeah.
you trust the code rather than people.
Okay. So trusting the code, I was reading recently. It's like in kind of the old world finance, or even in our dollars, previous to fiat currency, we trusted the system, which was gold, and now we're trusting the people, which is the government. And the movement away from gold into kind of what we have as fiat currency is shifting the trust. And I guess in Web3, what we're fundamentally saying is we're going kind of back to that. We're not honestly trusting the gold itself, but we're trusting, the code. Code is law, I guess, is what they say.
There's that, and it's really interesting because everybody criticizes crypto for the fact that it's magical internet money and it's not backed by anything.
Yeah.
It is really volatile, and
Yeah.
you see all of that. But yeah, your trust does come down to other things. So when you're interacting with an application or whatever it is, you're trusting the code. But beyond that, you have to trust the community, or you have to trust that it has a solid user base and that it's relevant, basically.
Okay. So what is the relationship between tokens or cryptocurrencies, as people know it by, and a DApp? How can I get involved in benefiting from a decentralized application aside from being a user?
Yeah. So tokens are basically another way for people to interact with dApps. So it can be in a lot of different forms. People interact with tokens because something might be token gated, which means that if they're connecting their wallet to this app or this application, it'll scan their crypto wallet and see if they hold a particular token.
Okay.
So access is one of the ways that tokens are beneficial to Web3.
Yeah.
But then a lot of these protocols will also, to incentivize users to stay on their application and use them, they'll generate like rewards tokens.
Okay.
And in DeFi, especially in decentralized finance, tokens are used in some pretty creative ways to reward people. There's what's known as staking, and you can lock up tokens and you can earn a reward. So it's basically, because a lot of Web3 is open source and everybody can kind of like copy these applications and replicate them, the way to attribute value is to grow a community and to kind of reward them.
Right.
And that's the way that it is right now because it's early in the space.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot more opportunities than there probably will be later.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So just to understand staking a little bit, which is an interesting term, I guess it's really just like a term deposit. I give my money to the bank for a year and they give me a higher interest rate than normal because I've committed that cash to them.
Yeah.
This is the same type of thing we see in DeFi when it comes to staking.
Yeah, and staking it's useful to just think of it as having a stake in something because basically everybody's an investor in Web3.
Yeah.
So if you want to lock up your tokens with somebody, and basically it's like you're a shareholder almost, and you get a reward, and that reward comes in different forms than dividends, but it's the same type of thing.
Yeah.
You can also stake as an infrastructure provider. So for us, for instance, people are running nodes with the Covalent network. They are staking large amounts of CQT, which is our token, in order to secure the network and to run their own infrastructure. So that's a little bit lower level, but there's lots that you can do with staking.
So is that the same? Is that the same type of idea when we hear of proof of stake? Maybe Ethereum moves to proof of stake, and people will lock up their tokens to be a node. Is that the same type of thing?
Yeah, sort of. So there's proof of work, which is the traditional method like adopted by Bitcoin, and it's people criticize that for being more resource intensive and more slow.
Right.
But basically, in order to run a decentralized network, you need nodes. And basically, you need people actually running the infrastructure.
Right.
And the decentralized aspect is that instead of one person telling you what's happening, it's a series of nodes that are agreeing that that's what's happening.
Right. Yeah.
So proof of stake is just a lighter way of doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's evolving and evolving as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So if we look at DApps, so if I buy the token of a DApp, I benefit from it becoming more popular and more people buying that token, fundamentally increasing the value of the token.
Yeah.
So I can speculate on that. And I also, I guess, benefit by owning the token if the DApp gets better and more user-friendly and more interesting. As a token holder, I have a better product that I can then engage with or use, especially if it's interesting to me.
Totally. There's that. And you have additional benefits in a lot of cases with voting. So a lot of decentralized protocols will not only give you rewards and give you perks when you have their tokens. You might be eligible for more airdrops, for instance.
Right. What's an airdrop?
So an airdrop is basically, it typically happens with newer protocols where they want to incentivize users, or they want to create a user base. So what they do, I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily promise it, but they hint that they're going to do what's called an airdrop, which means if you've used their application, they can see, like, with a record on chain of all of the wallets that have interacted with it. And they can go ahead and at a certain date drop all of those wallets tokens of theirs. So a lot of crypto culture has evolved from airdrops because people have made so much money just from testing out new applications. Because those tokens that they get dropped essentially for free because they might have just messed around on the application once. Yeah. Those can be worth like thousands or hundreds of thousands even of dollars. It's pretty crazy.
So here's a personal question for you. I have so many NFTs that have been airdropped to me in my wallet that are garbage. How do I get rid of them?
Okay, I know of one solution that I think is really interesting. And basically, it was a hackathon project that we saw at ETH Denver that created this thing that it's called Dust Sweeper, and it basically sweeps your wallet for like low amounts of certain tokens. It doesn't apply to NFTs because I'm not sure how they would judge that. But yeah, you can clean out your wallet if you do get a lot of airdrops, and I think a lot of people are working on that because your wallet address are public. Exactly, people can send you things and you can't do anything about it. So it's kind of a weird problem to have. But I think what you could do with NFTs, which would be interesting, is a lot of people incorporate sentiment analysis into their apps.
Okay.
So basically, what they'll do is they'll use like a Twitter API. And they'll search a particular project by name and they'll just see on average like how many keywords are positive or negative.
Yeah.
So if there's a trashy project or something, you could probably build that into an app that would clean it out of your wallet.
I feel like you just created a business opportunity for us all. All the listeners there, jump on board with this. Okay, that's good. Okay, so what DApps do you know of that are disrupting the current marketplace, that are really changing the way that we engage in Web3?
I think it is like kind of the big players, just because there's so many millions of dollars equivalent locked up in them, what's kind of called TVL, so total value locked. And it's not that they're the most interesting applications I see, but they're the ones that are kind of ensuring a large user base in the space. So it is typically like Uniswap is huge. And then there's other exchanges on chains like Avalanche, for instance. So Trader Joe or Pangolin, or even on Solana, which is really, really popular now. There's like Phantom Wallet, and they're all kind of competing more in features now and in kind of cool ways to engage the community. So Phantom Wallet, for instance, lets you mint an NFT in the wallet, which is kind of rare, or they'll have different ways of displaying the information. Rainbow Wallet is a really popular crypto wallet that has an SDK, so a software development kit for developers. They can go in and they can actually use all of that code. So they just kind of open source it and they're like, here, build on this, play with it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Is Rainbow on Ethereum?
Yeah, I think on a couple other networks too.
Is it competing with MetaMask then?
It's kind of hard to say if things are really competing with MetaMask, because I think MetaMask is really just like the base layer of crypto or of DeFi,
where everything happens.
Yeah. But MetaMask is interesting because as large as they are, I mean, personally, I use it. I don't really see them, adding that many cool, flashy product features or anything. I don't think they need to. It's just the easy go-to DeFi wallet.
As a Phantom Wallet user, I feel like Phantom is far superior to MetaMask and much easier and user-friendly.
That's exactly it, because they're trying to be user-friendly.
Right.
Yeah.
MetaMask is like pretentious, and they're like, well, if you can't figure this out, you don't deserve to be in the community.
Yeah, well, that's interesting though, because that totally exists in Web3.
Right.
There are different ways of thought, and a lot of the people that have been in this space for a long time kind of pride themselves on knowing all the ins and outs and having this technical knowledge that they needed to even be able to use these apps.
Right. I have some thoughts on this.
That's still a barrier.
I feel like that is the antithesis or the opposite of what the whole Satoshi Nakamoto vision was. It was to onboard everybody, to give everybody an opportunity, to remove walls and barriers and all this kind of stuff. And I feel that there are these kind of pretentious, especially technical people who are like, well, if you can't figure it out, well, that's too bad for you. And it's like, well, how is my mom ever going to get into Web3 if this is the attitude that people have?
Yeah, that's exactly what it always comes down to, I think, because everybody uses this word adoption, and adoption is what you need for an innovative technology to basically succeed. You need actually like mass adoption. And we're on this weird fine line where it's kind of cool to be in this space and you have to know a little bit more and you have to really figure it out, and it can take you hours to even transfer an asset from one wallet to another. Sometimes it's just complicated and it's hard, and people sort of take pride in that. It is a barrier to adoption, which in the end would actually help everyone succeed.
Right.
So
I've had so many conversations with people who have like heard about some token that they want to buy, and they say, well, Jared, how do I buy it? I'm like, well, you got to get your fiat into the marketplace, and then you got to create a MetaMask wallet and get your fiat there, and then you got to buy Ethereum, and then go to Uniswap. And it's like, well, by step 4, they're like, nah, I'm not really that interested, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a big problem, I think, for the industry. Okay, let me ask you this question. Are there any dApps that you know of that are better than their Web 2 counterparts, or what we do in Web 2, where you think, well, this is actually way better? Or are we still in such an early stage where everything is just kind of rough and a little bit Wild West?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it sort of depends how you define better to me, because user experience, to kind of tie it back to the last question, it really just isn't there in Web3 yet.
Okay.
There are some companies I think now that are really investing heavily, and people have had, $100, $200 million raises.
Right.
And these startups that were a group of 5 people in Web3 doing this thing are now really heavily investing into the experience, because it's only
Yeah.
a matter of time until your bigger companies like
Right.
Google and Apple are just kind of wiping out the space. But I think there are applications that are better in this sense, that they're more rewarding to the user.
Okay.
So it just kind of depends. Like if you're in this scene because you value privacy and you value trustlessness and you value, maybe you're in a country that has corrupt governments.
Right.
In the case of a lot of people that interact in crypto, that's true.
Yeah.
So there are better applications in the sense that like you can actually use them and access them and nobody can stop you, and you
Right.
can get rewards.
Yeah.
And in some cases you can earn a livable wage.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's that, but yeah, it's not as smooth of an
Yeah.
experience.
I think that's a really good way to put it, because I guess kind of what you're saying is like the vision of Web3 allows for enormous amount of opportunities. The user experience is still pretty rough in many of these situations, but yeah, I mean, if you're in the Philippines or in Indonesia and you want to play Axie and
Yeah.
like earn a living, I mean, that's pretty compelling. To be able to earn more than minimum wage playing a video game or something like that, which
Yeah,
I think is
exactly.
interesting. Okay, so what are the DApps outside of DeFi, because that's a big part of this space? What are the DApps that you use or that you know of that actually are like really maybe a pretty good experience and do offer value to the counterparts that they might have in Web 2?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these are still kind of small as well, but I focus on a lot of little use cases that I see in hackathons, because that is a good place to kind of see innovation and development here.
Yes, yeah.
So one of the ones that I like, it's called Huddle01, and basically it's a decentralized version of Zoom, essentially. And it actually came about because the founders of it are international, and they don't have the best bandwidth in a lot of areas. So
Okay.
even Zoom is like glitchy or not supported, or it
Yeah.
just doesn't have that many features. It's just kind of the monolith, so people use it.
Yeah.
So what they've done is, I mean, I can't really explain it technically, but they can share bandwidth essentially. They can create a faster experience and they can token gate it. So basically, if you're a community such as a DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization, and you have members based on them holding a token, you can gate a meeting. So only the members of that club basically can join.
Right.
So I think that's kind of cool. And it's not really DeFi, but there's a lot of apps that are supporting decentralized finance. So taxation apps that just make it easy, like a TurboTax, for instance, but for crypto, that you put in your wallet address and it tells you everything you've done.
Yeah.
So Rotkey is one of those. And yeah, there's just a lot more kind of these infrastructure apps that you don't realize that are the necessary components in between your interactions.
Right.
NFTs are not exactly DeFi either, but there's fun little galleries, for instance, where you can like showcase your artwork or what you've created in a cool way. You can create a profile. There's also Audius, which we've kind of talked about in the past, which is like a music, it's like Spotify for Web3.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
And with Audius, I guess there's tokenization, which incentivizes the artists, which is kind of cool because, I mean, in my view, I'm a musician, not a good one, but I'm a musician. And I see my musician friends struggle. It's so hard to make a living. And we've seen NFTs change that for traditional artists, but maybe we'll see that change for musicians with something like Audius.
Yeah, there is a growing movement for music NFTs, just the ability to track royalties,
right?
Because so much of that gets lost traditionally. So Web3 is good for anything where you want to track ownership, essentially.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been excellent. I think there's been lots of really great things that we've been able to touch on here, understanding what is a DApp and how do they work, what is token gating, tokenization, what is the purpose behind these decentralization apps, and how do they work. So that's been super helpful, Leilani. I really appreciate your time being with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was great.
Thanks.